My name is Lakshya Khetan. I'm from Section G. I am Trichy, and my topic would be India's crude oil dependency, a geopolitical and economic tightrope. Every time you fill up your tank, pay your electricity bill, or buy a packet of fertilizer, you are, without knowing it, participating in one of the most consequential economic dependencies of India. India is the third largest consumer of crude oil in the world, and it imports over 85% of what it needs. That number sits at the heart of India's inflation risk, its current account deficits, its foreign policy choices, and its energy future. Coming on to the structural vulnerability, India's crude oil import bill in FY 2023-24 stood at approximately 132 billion, making petroleum the single largest item in the India's import basket, accounting for nearly 27% of total imports. When global oil prices rises, India bleeds foreign exchange. The rupee depreciates, inflation rises, and the RBI is forced into an uncomfortable choice between growth and price stability. But this is not merely a macroeconomic story, it's deeply geopolitical. Coming on to the four phases. The phase 1, the controlled era. Under this, the Indian government controlled every rupee of the oil economy. State companies like ONGC and IOC dominated, but 1973 Arab oil embargo exposed a fatal flaw. India had no buffer, no strategic reserve, and no market mechanisms to absorb shocks. The state absorbed losses and the subsidies ballooned silently. Phase 2 came as a liberalization and Gulf War shock. In 1991, the balance of payment crisis was partly triggered by Gulf War induced oil price spike. India had only 2 weeks of foreign exchange left. This forced liberalization, but the oil price reform lagged everything else. Even as the India's economy opened, petroleum remained politically too sensitive to price at the market rates. Phase 3 was high growth and high vulnerability decade. India's GDP grew at 8 to 9% this period, and so did oil. The crude oil touched around $147 per barrel in 2008. India's oil subsidy bill crossed 1.4 lakh crores and the fiscal deficit widened. The rupee came under a lot of pressure, and the structural problem even deepened itself. Phase 4 was reform, Russia, and the geopolitical recalibration. After 2014, India deregulated its petrol and diesel pricing, a long overdue reform. But the real geopolitical stress test came in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Western nations sanctioned Russian oil. India pragmatically stepped in as a major buyer of discounted Russian crude, which rose from under 1% to nearly 40% of India's oil import by late 2023. This saved India's billion, but it also deepened dependency on a single geopolitically volatile supplier and drew scrutiny from Western allies. On to the oil and foreign policies. India's oil supply routes pass through some of the world's most contested waterways, the Strait of Hormuz, Red Sea corridors. Therefore, India's energy security is not just an economic question, it's a foreign policy question. Now, coming on to the road to energy security, India is not standing still. It has to transform itself with the three major terms where it should grow. First is the short term, medium term, and the long term. The short term should focus on strategic petroleum reserves, then diversify supply with US, Brazil, and finally accelerating the ethanol blending. The medium term should be electric vehicle adoption, green hydrogen, and finally reviving the domestic ENP. The long term is structural shift. 500 gigawatt renewable capacity is the target which India should reach by 2030. Then the net zero of 2070, which would be very helpful. Then finally the indigenous battery and EV manufacturing. Coming on to the last and the final slide. Here we can see that question is no longer whether India needs this transition or not. The question is how fast. Finally, India can structurally reduce that 85% dependency. If it can reduce it, then only it can remain less vulnerable to OPEC decisions, to pipeline politics, to war and distance desert. And the good news is the trajectory is changing. with ethanol blending, renewables, and EV adoptions. It's not just a policy document, it can very well rewrite India's future. And that's all from my side. Thank you.